I'm Alden, 45, a field ecologist raised in the still winds of South Dakota. At the will reading, they gave my brother the family estate and handed me a rotting house with mold on the ceiling. What they didn't know was buried under the floorboards, and it had my name on it. That night, as the firewood snapped and the rain hit tin, I found more than rot. I found intent. If you've ever been handed less and told to be grateful, tell me where you're listening from. I sat alone at the far end of the mahogany table, the kind of table built to seat power, just not for someone like me. My name had been scribbled last on the guest list, and even that felt like a reluctant courtesy. The chandelier above threw a pale shimmer across the polished wood, but nothing could warm the air in that room. Not with Brady already smiling like he knew how this would end. The family estate in Sioux Falls had always been cold in winter, but this felt different. It was the kind of cold that sank into your bones, not because of the temperature, but because of the people sitting across from you. Doug Hartley, the family attorney, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Let's begin. Brady leaned back in his chair, one arm slung across the backrest like he owned the place. I guess in a few minutes he would. Doug's voice echoed through the paneled room, careful and precise. To Brady Trask, my eldest son, I leave the Trask estate, including all assets contained within. Brady grinned. He didn't even try to hide it. Of course he got the estate. He always got the best of everything. Birthdays, college, Dad's approval. I stared down at a faint scratch on the table, running my finger along it like it might anchor me. Doug continued, shifting awkwardly. To Alden Trask, the property in Stillwater. I looked up. The Stillwater house? Doug hesitated. Yes, the lakeside property. Brady burst out laughing. You mean that falling apart cabin Grandpa used to fish at? That's still standing? A few chuckles rippled around the room. Aunt Cora covered her mouth politely. I didn't. I stared at Doug. That place hasn't been touched in decades. He nodded, folding his hands. It's technically still yours, Alden, along with its contents. A hollow drop opened in my chest. That was it. That was my slice of the legacy. An abandoned shack with a leaking roof and broken window panes, tucked away by a lake nobody visited anymore. I felt heat creep up the back of my neck. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about what it meant, what it had always meant. That I was background, a footnote, the son they tolerated, the brother who stayed quiet. My voice cracked before I could stop it. Was that really all he left for me? Doug looked apologetic, but his silence said more than any answer could. No one said a word. Even the air in the room seemed to pull back, unwilling to intervene. Brady raised his wine glass, smirking. Guess it's poetic, huh? The forgotten house for the forgotten son. I didn't touch my water, didn't say goodbye. Just pushed my chair back and walked out before dessert hit the table. Nobody stopped me. Nobody ever did. The wind hit harder once I stepped outside, slicing through my jacket. Gravel crunched beneath my boots as I moved toward my car, every step heavier than the last. The house. That damn house. I hadn't seen it since I was a teenager, when Grandpa still believed I'd make something of myself. I was halfway to the driver's seat when I heard footsteps behind me. Alden, wait, Doug called out. I turned. He was holding something. A small envelope, worn at the edges. This wasn't part of the official will, he said, breath visible in the cold. He gave it to me separately, said it was only for you. I frowned. What is it? Doug looked me square in the eye. He made me promise. It's only for the one who stays. He handed me the envelope, and I saw the words written in shaky cursive on the back. only for the one who stays. My fingers tightened around the flap. My breath caught. That wasn't my father's handwriting. That was my grandfather's. And for the first time that night, I felt something other than shame. I felt a question forming. What had he left behind that no one else was supposed to find? The key fought back. I had to jiggle it twice before the rusted front door gave way with a groan so loud it seemed to protest my return. The hinges wailed, metal grinding on metal, as I pushed open the door to a place no one had entered in years. The first breath I took was thick with mold, pine, and memory. Morning light filtered through cracked slats in the wood siding, catching flecks of dust in the air like snow in still water. The floor creaked beneath my boots. Everything was where I remembered it, almost eerily so. Grandpa's old flannel still hung on a bent nail near the window. A photo of him and Grandma in their canoe sat lopsided on the mantel. One of the logs in the fireplace had turned to ash, but never been swept away. It was like time had given up trying here. I stepped further in. The floorboards shifted, one popping loose. On the shelf by the stove sat a half-burnt ledger, pages curled and singed, the ink bleeding in places from humidity or grief. I couldn't tell which. Behind me, the screen door snapped shut. Most people would bulldoze this place, Doug said, standing in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to enter. I'm not most people, I murmured, thumbing the envelope still tucked inside my coat pocket. It felt heavier now. Doug gave a small nod. There's value in the land, but the house itself, I've seen better held up with duct tape and stubbornness. I ran my hand along a beam near the entry. Something was carved into it, barely visible beneath the grime. I squinted. The one who remembers keeps. I traced the words with my fingers. Grandpa's handwriting again. Rough, etched with the blade of a fishing knife, probably. It didn't feel like just a saying. It felt like a message, a warning, or a challenge. Doug held out a hand, gesturing toward the envelope. You going to open it? I hesitated, then broke the seal with my thumb. Inside was a folded document, old but carefully preserved. Not a letter. A deed. I unfolded it slowly. It wasn't for the shack. It was for the land around it. 32 acres of untouched forest, stretching all the way to the North Bluff. My name was already on the papers. Grandpa had transferred the deed into a trust, one he'd set up in my name years ago. I blinked. This was never part of the will. Doug shrugged. It was separate. He didn't want the others to know. Said the land wasn't for people who take shortcuts. I sank into the nearest chair, the cushion puffing out a small cloud of dust. My chest felt tight, but not with anger. With something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Hope. Maybe this wasn't about being forgotten. Maybe this was something more. Maybe it was a test. Doug stepped back toward the door. You sure you want this, Alden? It's going to be a hell of a project. I looked around at the rotting floorboards, the sagging ceiling, the long dead stove. Then I looked out the window, where early autumn's sun cast shadows between the trees. I'm staying, I said. That night, I found a broom with broken bristles and started sweeping. Dust clung to the floor like the past didn't want to be disturbed. My arms ached, my knees cracked, but I kept going. I wasn't cleaning for comfort. I was cleaning to reclaim something. I didn't know exactly what it was yet, but I could feel it pulling at me. The sun had long since dipped behind the lake when I finally sat on the porch steps, sweat dampening the back of my neck. The envelope sat beside me, empty now, but full of everything I hadn't been given before. Respect, purpose, maybe even love. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. Brady's voice poured through like venom. "You're not keeping that land," he said. "You think he meant it for you? You think that place should be yours?" I didn't respond. He chuckled darkly. "That should have been mine, Alden. It was supposed to be." I let the silence sit between us, heavy and final. And then I hung up. Inside, the words Grandpa carved into the beam waited like a vow. The one who remembers, keeps. And I remembered. I wasn't leaving. Brady's SUV pulled up the gravel path like it didn't belong, shiny, black, and far too clean for a place that hadn't seen a paved road in 20 miles. His wife, Marla, stepped out first, her heels clicking against the dirt like she thought she could change the ground beneath her. Pearls around her neck, silk scarf in her hair. You'd think they were headed to a country club brunch, or a funeral. Maybe in Brady's mind, it was both. He stepped out a moment later, sunglasses perched on his forehead and a scowl already tugging at his mouth. Behind him trailed a man in a tailored gray suit, briefcase in hand, expression like he'd smelled something offensive the moment he got out of the car. The lawyer, I assumed. Not Doug. Someone new. Someone sharper. Brady didn't knock. Didn't say hello. He walked the land like he already owned it, eyes scanning the trees, the sky, the edge of the bluff like he was deciding where to bulldoze first. I stepped down from the porch, arms crossed. "Thought you might show," I said. He didn't answer right away, just handed a stack of documents to the lawyer, who passed them to me like they were a gift. "You're trespassing," I added. Brady gave a humorless laugh. "On land that should be mine? I don't think so." I flipped through the papers, legal jargon, demand letters, a notice of intent to file a claim. He was making it official, formal, ugly. "You have no right to this," Brady said, stepping forward, voice low and clipped. "You think some handwritten trust gives you 30 acres and water rights? You think you earned that?" "It was Grandpa's," I replied calmly. "He made the decision. He chose me." Brady's lip curled. "He was senile. Probably thought you were someone else." I looked up from the paperwork. He remembered everything, even the things the rest of you tried to forget. His lawyer cleared his throat. "You can avoid the headache, Mr. Trask. Sign it over voluntarily and we'll spare you court." Brady took a step closer. "Do the right thing, Alden. We both know you're not cut out for this. You live in a cabin that's falling apart. You sweep floors like it matters. What are you even trying to prove?" I glanced behind me at the shack, weathered, small, stubborn. It wasn't much, but it had survived. And now, so had I. "You're not fighting for heritage," I said quietly. "You're fighting to erase it." Brady's jaw tightened. Marla shifted uncomfortably beside him, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. Her pearls caught the sun and glinted like tiny teeth. "You'll regret this," Brady muttered. "Doug won't win this for you. This isn't some fishing trip with Grandpa. This is court, lawyers, depositions, costs." I folded the documents and handed them back to the lawyer. "Then I guess I better start cleaning the place up," I said, turning away. Doug arrived just as they left, his truck spitting dust behind them. He parked beside the shack, stepped out, and rubbed the back of his neck. "I heard shouting," he said. "They came with papers." He sighed. "I warned you, he doesn't bluff." "I'm not signing," I said. Doug nodded slowly, eyes tired. "Then you need to brace yourself. This won't be cheap, not just the lawyers. Emotionally, financially. Brady's going to dig." I looked down at my hands, still calloused from sweeping, from lifting rotten beams and clearing out moldy cabinets. Hands that had built nothing, yet had finally started to feel like they belonged to someone again. "Then let him dig," I said. Doug hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket. A folded photograph. "He left more than paperwork," he said. "You might want to call Elias." I took the photo carefully. It was old, yellowed, and slightly torn at the corner. Grandpa stood with a boy in his teens, dark hair, taller than I remembered myself being at that age. They were both holding shovels, standing behind the cabin. Between them, something had been freshly planted in the soil. It wasn't labeled, no date, just dirt, 2 hands, and a small wooden marker driven into the earth. My breath caught. "That's not me," I said quietly. Doug shook his head. "It's Elias." I stared at the photograph again. The dirt, the tree, whatever it was behind the cabin. And it had meant something. "What were they planting?" Doug gave a small smile. "I don't think it was vegetables." The Greyhound wheezed to a stop at the corner of the old general store, its engine coughing like it was offended to be out here in the middle of nowhere. The driver didn't even get out. The only passenger stepped off slowly, his moccasins meeting gravel with a soft thud. Elias carried no suitcase, just a walking stick polished smooth from years of handling and a leather pouch slung across his shoulder. His gray braid hung down his back, long and steady like a river that had forgotten how to run dry. He spotted me before I could wave. "Boy," he said, smiling. No one had called me that since Grandpa passed. The word hit like a breeze through a closed window, sudden, strange, and familiar all at once. We shook hands. His grip was firm but patient, like he was more interested in what I'd become than how strong I was. "Still tall," he said, "but thinner in the eyes." I nodded, unsure how to answer that. The ride back was mostly quiet. Elias kept his gaze out the window, watching the land blur into pine and bluff. When we arrived at the shack, he stepped out slowly, breathing deep, as if tasting the air for something it might be hiding. He walked the perimeter without invitation. His fingers brushed the trees, the soil, the beams of the porch. He didn't ask questions. He already knew the answers. "This isn't just land," he finally said, standing beneath a crooked cedar. "It's a promise." I stepped beside him. "That's what Grandpa believed?" He gave me a sideways glance. "That's what he kept. The land was never about titles or fences. It's about memory, and what you grow from it." He reached into his pouch and pulled out a folded piece of worn leather. Inside were tiny bones, each etched with a symbol. He laid them gently on the porch rail. "I told him," Elias murmured, "that this place would call you one day. Didn't expect it to be under fire, but sometimes that's how beginnings look." He motioned for me to follow, and we walked behind the cabin, past the edge of the clearing, past the downed log Grandpa had once turned into a bench. Elias stopped before a circle of stones I hadn't noticed before, some moss-covered, others sun-bleached. "This is where we planted them," he said. He knelt, knees cracking, breath steady, and began pulling stones aside with care. Underneath, buried in soft earth, were several small bundles wrapped in oiled hide, seeds, preserved with a care that told me this had not been done lightly. "Sacred corn, from my grandfather's line. He gave them to yours in '63, said one day they'd need to come back home." I knelt too, hands trembling. "Why me?" He looked at me, not through me, but deep, like searching under bark. "Because you stayed. The land chooses who listens." The seeds felt warm in my palm, though I knew they shouldn't have. Time shifted in that moment, not as memory but as weight. The weight of lineage, of quiet, unshouted responsibility. Tears pricked at the edges of my eyes. "They wanted to give me a ruin," I whispered, "but I found a beginning." Elias smiled without showing teeth. "Now we replant, not for tradition, for future." So we did. We chose a spot where the earth was soft but not soaked, just behind the cabin where sunlight stretched long in the afternoon. Elias knelt again, slower this time, and placed the seeds back into the soil, one by one, like laying down prayers. I followed, pressing the dirt gently, as if waking something rather than burying it. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. That night, Elias took the bench near the hearth, lit a fire that crackled like it remembered better days, and told stories, not of war or victories, but of trees that grew in silence and men who stayed when it was hardest. I slept on the floor near the fire, not because the bed was broken, but because the earth felt closer there. Around midnight, the porch light flickered once, then twice. I sat up. A soft shuffling came from the front step. When I opened the door, the night air was thick and still. No one stood there. But on the floor just inside, a letter waited. No stamp, no envelope, just folded parchment tied with red thread, scrawled in a hand I hadn't seen in years. Kendra. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. The sun hadn't fully risen when I stepped out the next morning, coffee in one hand, the unopened letter in the other. And there, just beyond the stones, barely visible in the morning mist, a single green sprout had broken through the dirt. It stood like it belonged, like it remembered. The letter sat on the edge of the table all morning, untouched. I made coffee, swept the floor, repaired a loose hinge on the pantry door. Anything to avoid opening that fold of parchment tied with red thread. Outside, clouds thickened like they were chewing on something unsaid. Thunder rolled low across the lake, distant but coming closer, like a conversation I couldn't outrun. By noon, the silence in the shack got louder than the storm. I pulled the thread loose. The letter was short, no greeting, no warmth, just her handwriting, precise, controlled, like always. I heard about the will. You never fought for what was yours, Alden. Why now? I read it twice, then a third time. Not because I didn't understand, but because something in those words scratched against old bruises. Kendra had always known how to ask the right questions, but never kindly. She was my cousin by blood, but more like a sister during our childhood. The kind of sister who dared me to jump from the dock first, who stole candy and blamed me, who defended me from bullies with the same breath she used to remind me I'd never be brave enough to leave town. I sat at the table with a pencil that had been chewed down to the wood. My reply was quiet, but not small. This isn't about what I want, I wrote. It's about what they tried to bury, and I won't let them. I left the note unsealed. If she wanted to read it, she would. That night the storm came down like it meant to wash everything away. I stood on the porch watching the rain pummel the dirt, wondering if the sprout Elias and I planted would survive its first trial. In the morning, she was there. No knock, no text. Just Kendra, standing in the clearing like a memory that hadn't aged. She wore boots too clean for the mud and a coat too thin for the mountain wind. Her hair was damp, loose from the braid she always used to wear. When she saw me, she didn't smile. "It's still standing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were on the shack, the trees, the soil. I nodded. "Most of it." She took a step forward. Her boots sank into the wet earth. "You didn't sell it?" "No," I said. I stayed. We walked in silence for a while, our footsteps crunching across pine needles and soft gravel. I showed her the ledger I'd found, half burnt, still brittle with age, and the sapling growing behind the cabin. She didn't ask questions right away, just observed, like she was studying the landscape of someone else's grief. We ended up under the old pine, the one with the bent trunk that Grandpa used to tie ribbons to during summer festivals. She sat first. I joined, careful not to crowd her. We didn't speak for 10 minutes. That silence said everything. I glanced at her. She was staring at the ledger in my lap. "You remember this?" I asked, lifting the charred cover, her brow furrowed. "Grandpa's old book?" "It's more than that." I opened to a page in the middle. Ink faded but legible. Names, numbers, land parcels, debts, gifts, donations, and there, 3 lines from the top, her name. Kendra M. Trask, education grant, $42,000, spring 003. She inhaled sharply. This is a record of every transaction, even mine." I nodded. "And Brady's, and Doug's, and probably mine, though I haven't found it yet." She touched the edge of the page like it might bite her. "Why would he keep this?" "Because memory matters," I said, "even when we try to forget it." Her eyes met mine for the first time all day, and I saw it. Not just surprise, not anger, but something else. Guilt, maybe. Regret, curling at the edges like smoke. And beneath that, a flicker of something I hadn't seen in her in years. Fear, not of me, but of what I might become without needing her approval. She handed the ledger back slowly, careful not to smudge the ink. "You're serious about this," she said. "I am." She looked out at the clearing again, then down at her boots. "They all think you're wasting your time, you know." "I know. And you're okay with that?" I leaned back against the trunk. "No," I said, "but I'm okay with me." She smiled. It wasn't big, it wasn't warm, but it wasn't fake either. We sat for a while longer, watching the shadows move across the dirt. Before she left, she asked one more question. Soft, almost like it wasn't meant for me. "What else did your grandfather leave behind?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood, walked inside, and pulled the ledger from the shelf. It smelled of smoke and old paper. I held it out to her. "Let's find out." Each page crackled under my fingers like dry leaves caught in wind. The ledger didn't just record numbers, it kept memories, silent and exact. Names, dates, withdrawals, donations, secrets that never asked to be known. Kendra sat across the table, legs crossed tight, reading over my shoulder. Her silence was sharp, focused. When she leaned forward, I could feel her breath catch. 200,000, she murmured. To the reservation school. The entry was buried between routine donations to the Veterans Hall and utility expenses for the cabin. But this one was different. Structured through 3 dummy accounts. Untraceable on the surface, except for one thing. "Signed under your name," she said, pointing. I stared at it. I hadn't touched a checkbook in years, much less those years. I traced the signature with my finger. The loops were too clean, too confident. My own handwriting always leaned left. "I didn't sign this," Kendra nodded. "I know." The air in the shack shifted, heavy with a different kind of silence. Not grief, not nostalgia, betrayal. I turned the page. More entries, medical bills, a clinic renovation, school supplies, all listed under my name, scattered across 6 years. Most of it tied to the local Lakota programs. Elias's work, my grandfather's vision. "He trusted you," Kendra whispered, "to protect this, and never told you." "Or he knew," I said, voice low, "that if he told me I'd leave, and he couldn't risk that." Kendra leaned back. "You really think he planned that far ahead?" I didn't answer. I was already turning the next page. Near the back, almost the end, I stopped. The paper looked newer, not yellowed like the others. The ink still shone faintly under the light. It was a loan, $87,000, drawn 3 months before grandfather's death. Signed Brady Trask. But the co-signer? My name. The same signature. Too clean. Too bold. Not mine. I felt something inside me shift, like a floorboard coming loose underfoot. They gave me the Crumbling house, I whispered, to make me feel broken, but they were the ones stealing from me. Kendra leaned forward, eyes locked on the numbers. This is fraud, she said, and it's traceable. I know. My mind raced, memories slotting into place. The times Brady laughed off finances, the way my father dismissed my questions after the will, the smug look Brady wore like a tailored suit. It wasn't about land. It never was. I closed the ledger slowly, like tucking away a piece of evidence. Kendra stood and reached into her coat pocket. I brought something, she said, sliding a flash drive across the table. What's this? County filings, property transactions, tax records. I downloaded them before coming. I raised an eyebrow. You've been digging? After that letter I sent? Of course. I needed to know what kind of fire I was stepping into. I plugged the drive into the old laptop Doug had left last week. It booted slower than molasses in January, but eventually it opened. Dozens of files, labeled, dated, each one a window into what my brother had been doing. He's been liquidating parcels, Kendra explained, pointing. Small pieces of the estate, quietly, reinvesting under shell companies. Guess whose name is listed as silent partner? I didn't have to ask. Me, she nodded. Stillwater, she said. The cabin. It wasn't just an insult, it was a cover. My chest tightened. If Brady had used my name for loans and sales, if the trust hadn't been airtight, I could be held liable. Or worse, he'd already planned to pin something on me. I looked down. Tucked inside the final page of the ledger was a single paperclip, bent awkwardly around a scrap of handwritten note. Stillwater is the key. 3 words. Faded, hurried penmanship. My grandfather's. I folded the note, held it between my fingers. Kendra's voice broke through the stillness. You need a lawyer, Alden. I have Doug. You need more than Doug. Outside, the wind picked up again, the trees shifted, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed. I stood, walked to the window and stared out over the lake. The shack wasn't much, the ledger just pages, but now they were more than history. They were leverage, and for the first time since the will reading, I wasn't just reacting, I was preparing. The tires crunched against the gravel drive like they remembered me. I hadn't stepped foot onto the estate in 17 years, but everything felt smaller now, like the place had shrunk without my father's presence to fill it. Brady stood on the front steps, hands tucked into a navy blazer like he was hosting a garden tour. Well, well, he said, smirking. Come to admire the success you missed out on? I parked near the old fountain, long drained and cracked. The estate loomed behind him, pristine, polished, sterile. I got out, shut the door calmly, and walked up without a word. Brady tilted his head. You look older. You look desperate, I said. He stiffened. Excuse me? I reached into my coat and held up the folded ledger, the worn leather cover barely holding. You used my name. Brady's smile twitched, just slightly. What are you talking about? You forged a loan, a trust payout, property transfers. I have the ledger. Kendra has the county files. He didn't blink. You have no proof, he said. I stepped closer. I have your signature next to mine. One is yours. One isn't mine. His jaw tightened. That old man was losing it. You think this'll hold up in court? I think you're afraid it will. Something changed then. He dropped the fake smile, let it rot right off his face. You were always weak, he hissed. Always the quiet one, the strange one. You think Dad left you anything out of love? No, he gave you a ruin, a joke. He wanted you to feel small. I looked past him, to the windows of the house where we once lived like shadows, where I had learned early to disappear in a room full of family. And for the first time in a long while, I saw the truth. He didn't want the land. He wanted me to stay broken, because that made him whole. You needed me to be nothing, I said quietly, so you could keep telling yourself you earned everything. He shoved me. It wasn't dramatic, just a sharp, mean push, the kind that carries 17 years of resentment in its shoulder. I stumbled back a step, but didn't fall. You want war? He growled. You've got it. I didn't answer. The door opened behind him. Their new housekeeper peered out and quickly disappeared. Curtains shifted upstairs. I turned and walked back to the car. Kendra stood near the driver's side, folder in hand, lips pressed tight. He didn't deny it, did he? She asked. No. She opened the folder and pulled out a faded black and white photograph. Two men stood on a patch of cleared forest. One was Grandpa, the other Elias. Both younger, both smiling. Between them stood a third man in a Bureau of Indian Affairs jacket. The corner of the photo read, Stillwater, 1989. This isn't just land, Alden, Kendra said. It's part of a protected corridor, registered under federal documents tied to the Lakota. I blinked. That was never in the trust. No, because your grandfather bypassed the family trust. He filed it as a cultural stewardship agreement. Technically, it can't be sold, but it can be. She paused. Inherited. I looked at the photo again. Grandpa's hand rested lightly on Elias's shoulder. They weren't just partners in land. They were guardians of something older, deeper. Brady can't even legally challenge that, I whispered. He can try, Kendra said, but this changes everything. The sky had darkened. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the trees. I folded the photo, slipped it into my jacket. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was defending what little I had. I was protecting something sacred. Elias sat at the kitchen table, his eyes closed, both hands resting on his cane like it held more than his weight. Morning light filtered through the curtains, painting lines across his weathered face. You finally ready to learn what you were born into? He asked, without looking at me. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, feeling the knots in my shoulders tighten. I think so. He opened his eyes. Calm. Clear. The kind of eyes that had seen too much and forgot none of it. That land, he said, nodding toward the forest beyond the window, was never just a gift. It was a covenant, protected under the Native American Land Preservation Trust since 1990. Your grandfather made sure of it. I frowned. But why hide it? Why not tell me this years ago? Elias looked down at his knuckles. Because the truth, when handed without pain, becomes noise. He needed you to understand what it costs. To lose land, to lose story, to lose name. He didn't want to spare you from it. He wanted you to feel it. A lump tightened in my throat. They thought they could humiliate you with this house, he said, voice low. But this house stands on sacred ground. You weren't cast out, you were placed. I turned to the ledger still lying open on the counter. Beneath layers of betrayal and silence, there was a thread, carefully woven. Not for wealth, for memory. And Brady? I asked. He doesn't care about memory, Elias said. He only fears losing control. That afternoon, Doug came by in his usual coat and calm expression, but his eyes widened when I handed him the completed documentation. You're submitting a formal protection claim? He asked, flipping through the pages. Not just that, I said. We're asserting cultural stewardship. He raised an eyebrow. This could take weeks, but it'll hold, especially with the land marked as untransferable under federal code. Kendra leaned against the doorway behind him. She'd stayed another night, not offering to help exactly, but not leaving either. She watched everything like someone trying to understand where she fit in a story that no longer revolved around her. "I'm not just defending a shack," I said later, standing alone beneath the wide branches of the pine. "I'm defending a truth." Elias walked out and stood beside me, silent. There was something about the wind that day, how it carried not just air, but presence, as if something was listening. That night, we all ate quietly at the cabin. Kendra made pasta, simple and surprisingly good. Doug left after dinner, promising updates. Elias sipped tea from the same chipped mug Grandpa used to favor. I stepped out to the porch as the last light drained from the sky. A hawk, broad-winged, silent, landed on the wooden post, right where the old railing had split. It didn't move, just stared, as if it had been here before. I remembered the photo Grandpa kept in his office, him and Elias kneeling near that same post, the hawk in the background. Same gaze, same perch. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Voicemail. Brady. His voice came through jagged and tight. "You think this is over? You're dragging the family name through the mud. You'll regret it. We're not done, Alden." I closed the phone and let the message fade into the hum of the woods. Maybe he was right. We weren't done. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Doug's office smelled like old wood, coffee gone stale, and something else. Urgency, the kind that clung to the air but didn't raise its voice. He sat behind his desk, fingers poised over the keyboard, eyes flickering across the screen like a man defusing a bomb. "Everything's in place," he said, voice low. "This is your last chance to pull back." I didn't move. "Click it." He hit submit. The screen blinked, the page refreshed, and suddenly, it was real. We'd officially filed a land protection claim under the Native American Land Preservation Trust, citing not just cultural significance, but also misuse of power of attorney, inheritance discrepancies, and, though Doug had softened the wording, allegations of fraud. "I need you to understand," Doug said, leaning back in his chair. "This could drag on for months, maybe longer." I looked out the window, where a leafless birch trembled in the wind. "I'm not walking away just because they want me to." He gave a short nod, then rubbed his temples. "The press might catch wind of this, Alden, and your brother's reputation. Let's just say he doesn't exactly fly under the radar." Once, that would have frozen me. The thought of airing the family's rot in public, the shame, the whispers, the sideways glances at the grocery store. But now? "Let them look," I said. "Let them see it all." Doug raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "I'm sure." We finalized the paperwork, printed out hard copies, and filed a formal injunction. Brady would be notified within 48 hours. He couldn't sell, transfer, or develop the land during that time. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a wall. And he'd have to feel it. That night, I sat on the cabin steps with a cup of tea, steam curling up like the ghosts of things I no longer feared. The lake was still, holding the sky like a mirror. Then came the knock. 3 short raps. I opened the door to find Noah standing there, jacket half-zipped, face pale, and a swelling bruise blooming over his cheekbone. "Noah." He stepped inside, wincing slightly. I didn't know who else to come to. "What happened?" He tossed his backpack onto the couch, then pulled out a sealed envelope. "Your brother's people. They came looking for the ledger. Said I had something that didn't belong to me." I felt my jaw tighten. "They hurt you?" He shrugged. "Let's just say they weren't looking to talk." He sat down heavily, rubbing his temples. Then, from the same bag, he pulled out a folded sheet of yellowed paper edges worn like it had been handled too often and too carefully. "Elias gave me this months ago," he said. "Told me to keep it safe in case something happened to him. Said you'd know when the time was right." I opened it slowly. It wasn't just any document. It was a second trust, unsigned, but clearly drawn up in my grandfather's handwriting. The trust placed the surrounding forest, the lakeside, even a portion of the family estate, under joint stewardship, not sole inheritance. Names listed: Alden Trask, Noah Evans, and Elias Wapaha. My throat went dry. Why wasn't this signed?" Noah shrugged. "He was waiting for the one who would stay." I looked down at the familiar loops of Grandpa's cursive. The language was careful, purposeful. It didn't name heirs, it named guardians. A gust of wind rattled the windows. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. "Doug needs to see this," I murmured. But first I turned to Noah. "You're staying here tonight." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "They came after you once. I'm not letting it happen again." He nodded and sank into the armchair by the fireplace, the bruise already darkening into purple. I laid the second trust flat on the table, next to the ledger. Some truths don't arrive with trumpets. Sometimes they knock with bruised lips and trembling hands, and sometimes they come just in time. I woke coughing. The air was thick, acrid. My lungs clenched before my mind could process what was happening. Smoke. Heat. Something crackling. Fire. I stumbled from the cot, heart hammering against my ribs. Noah wasn't in the chair. I followed the glow, a pulsing orange halo coming from the side wall of the cabin. "Kendra!" I shouted. She burst from the back room, barefoot, hair disheveled, clutching her phone. "Outside, now!" We got out just as the flames reached the porch corner. Doug's emergency fire blanket from his last visit had been left behind, still in the trunk of his car. Noah had grabbed it, already beating at the edges of the blaze, teeth gritted. The fire didn't take the whole cabin. Just one wall, one table, the one where the ledger had been. Kendra looked at me as the last of the flames hissed into smoke. They knew exactly where to strike. I didn't answer at first, just stared at the blackened shell of the room. The beam above the fireplace had scorched, but not fully, just enough to reveal something beneath the soot. A message, faint but still legible. "The one who remembers, keeps." My voice came quieter than I expected. "They forgot something." Kendra turned. "I scanned every page," I said. "2 nights ago. Uploaded to 3 drives, 1 off-grid." Her eyes met mine, equal parts relief and something sharper. "You're playing chess now." I shook my head. "I'm done playing. This is war." Later that afternoon, Doug drove down from town, jaw tight, car trunk already open before he even stepped out. We packed every scrap of evidence, digital drives, copies of the trust documents, the photographs, even Grandpa's letters, and secured them in 2 separate locations. One at Doug's office, one under password-locked cloud access, with backup keys shared with Elias and Kendra. Noah sat on the porch steps, watching the ashes swirl like ghosts. His jaw was set, but his hand trembled slightly on his knee. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "This doesn't scare us. It defines them." He nodded, silent. By nightfall, I'd replaced the scorched curtains, patched the door frame, and burned what was left of the table myself. If they wanted to destroy something, they'd have to do it in front of me next time. Brady called later. His voice crackled through the voicemail with a smugness I could hear like a grin behind glass. "You want war?" he said. "You just declared it." I played it twice, then deleted it. Not out of fear, but because I didn't need threats. I had truth. And truth, I was learning, didn't flinch. That evening, Doug called from his office. I was out back, fixing the gutter, when Kendra brought the phone to me. "There's a hearing," Doug said without preamble. "Emergency injunction. Judge agreed the threat's credible. Court date, 10 days. I exhaled slowly. "Then we're on the record." Doug paused, then added, "Be ready. They won't fight fair." "I don't need them to. I just need them to fight in daylight." Later, after everything quieted down, I walked back into the cabin alone. The smoke had cleared. Most of the damage stayed on that one wall. But in the half-burned wood, the etched phrase still stared back at me. "The one who remembers keeps." I ran my fingers across the letters, now blackened but alive. They thought they could erase me. Instead, they gave me the match I'd needed to light everything. Not to destroy, but to rebuild. With my own hands. The room buzzed like a hive, full of voices too many for one ear to catch. I stood just inside the entrance of the Sioux Falls Community Center, the same one where Grandpa used to bring me for potlucks and winter coat drives. The fluorescent lights still flickered faintly. The smell of coffee and old floor wax hadn't changed in 20 years. What had changed was me. I wasn't the quiet grandson tagging behind a man who seemed to belong everywhere. I was here now not to watch, but to answer. Elias gave me a nod from across the room. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just that steady look like a root finding earth. "They came," he said. "They came for Grandpa," I murmured. He raised an eyebrow. "And maybe for you, too." Noah was leaning against the snack table, half-eaten cookie in hand. "You think this land raised just you?" he said. "It raised all of us." He motioned around at the crowd. I hadn't realized until then. These people weren't just here to witness. They were here to stand. A woman in her 70s shuffled up beside me. Her silver braid was tied with a faded blue ribbon. "Your grandfather once fed my children from that cabin," she said, voice low but clear. "No questions, no pride, just food on a cold day." I swallowed hard. "This land isn't just trees and dirt," she continued. "It holds stories." Elias stepped forward and opened a worn leather folder. Inside were pages, yellowed, handwritten, and signed. Testimonies. "I asked a few folks to find what they could," he said. "Turns out they never forgot what your grandfather promised." One of the elders, hands shaking slightly, handed the folder to me. The ink was faded but still legible. Statements, dates, moments, pledges Grandpa had made to preserve the land, to share it, to shelter it. I didn't realize I was gripping the pages too tightly until Kendra placed her hand on my shoulder. "These," she said, "are the heart of your case. This isn't just defense, this is truth." I nodded slowly. "We're going to scan every page, save every voice." She smiled faintly. "Already ahead of you. I'll digitize everything. Create an archive, open source." The meeting turned into something quiet and powerful. Elders shared names. Faces emerged from memories I didn't know I had. Kids I used to fish with, now fathers and mothers. One woman I barely remembered told me she still had the necklace Grandpa made her when she lost her husband. She reached into her coat and held it out. "It's time it came home," she whispered. It was rough, handmade, beads from the lake, a thin line of turquoise, worn smooth by time and touch. I took it, chest tight. "Thank you," was all I could say. That night, back at the cabin, the silence felt different. Not empty, just full in a quieter way. Kendra sat on the porch with her laptop, cataloging photos and tagging interviews. Noah was inside, reading over the affidavit drafts Doug had sent. The fire was low, warm. I leaned against the doorframe and let myself feel the weight, not just of the fight, but of the people now behind it. At 10:43 p.m., my inbox chimed. Subject: Local story opportunity. Regarding the Trask estate. Body. Mr. Trask, I've been following the court filings and local chatter. Sources say your brother's campaign donors are uneasy. Would you be open to sharing your side? Before someone else tells it for you? Dana K. Sioux Ledger News. I stared at the screen, heart beating slow and steady. This wasn't just my story anymore. It never had been. He stood like he'd been waiting for a camera crew that never showed. Brady leaned against his black SUV near the edge of Main Street, hands tucked into a camel, coat that looked one size too expensive. His sunglasses were off. Too much to hide behind now, I guessed. I almost kept walking. But he stepped forward before I could pass. "Let's not drag this out," he said, voice slick with that old veneer of control. "Sit a minute." The diner behind him hadn't changed since high school. Still smelled like fryer grease and burnt coffee. I followed him in, half out of curiosity, half out of knowing he hated when I didn't flinch. He slid into a booth and gestured for the waitress without looking. When she walked away, he pulled out an envelope. $600,000, he said flatly. Cash, clean. You walk away, drop the claim, sign the NDA. I didn't touch the envelope, just looked at him. "You really think I'm still that cheap?" I asked. Brady leaned forward. "You think you're gonna win this in court? Seriously, Alden, what's your plan? Drag the family name through every headline and end up with legal bills and a shack with termites?" I smiled, just a little. "You know what's funny? You're not offering money to help me. You're offering it to save yourself." He chuckled. "You always were sentimental." I picked up the envelope, weighed it in my hand like something foreign, then slid it back across the table. "I'm not for sale," I said. "Not anymore." His eyes narrowed. "You're going to lose." "I already did," I said quietly. "For years, I lost time, family, respect. This isn't about revenge, Brady. It's about truth. And truth doesn't wear a price tag." He looked like he wanted to spit, but didn't. Instead, he leaned back and crossed his arms. "You think you're a hero," he muttered. "No," I replied. "I just stopped being the villain you needed me to be." I stood and left him there, surrounded by quiet, his favorite weapon. I'd let him sit with it for a change. The wind picked up as I walked back through town. The autumn leaves chased each other across cracked pavement. My boots scraped against sidewalks I hadn't walked since I was a boy. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun had dipped low. Light streaked the living room in warm gold as I stepped inside. Doug's number flashed on my phone. I answered. "Hey." His voice was sharp but restrained. The judge unsealed something from the estate file. "What kind of something?" "A clause. One your father never mentioned, and that Brady probably didn't know existed. You'll want to sit down." My legs bent before my mind processed the request. "I'm listening." "I'm emailing you now, but Alden, there's a key." I blinked. "A key?" "To a safe, apparently buried or hidden beneath floorboards. The estate clerk flagged it under your name. The file references it as Supplement D." I hung up before he could say more. The cabin creaked as I moved to the far wall, the one Grandpa always kept a rug over, even when it didn't match anything. I pulled the old bear print carpet back and tapped my knuckles against the pine boards. Hollow. It took a screwdriver and some patience, but within minutes I found it. A small iron box rusted at the corners, and taped beneath it, a key, labeled only with one word, written in Grandpa's hand. "Remember." The floorboard creaked like it had waited years to be lifted. I wedged the crowbar beneath the warped edge, heart beating steadier than I expected, and pried upward. Dust curled in the firelight. Beneath the plank, nestled between support beams, was the safe. It was heavy, cold, the kind of metal that didn't just store secrets, it protected them. The key slid in with surprising ease. A click echoed like a whisper too long held. Inside, time waited. An old oilskin folder, a stack of tapes labeled by hand, a legal deed, corners yellowed, and a folded note torn along one edge like it had been handled more than once. My name was written on the front. I sat back on my heels, fingers trembling as I unfolded the letter. If you're reading this, you already know the truth. I'm sorry I couldn't tell it sooner. The land was never just about ownership. It was about stewardship, about who could carry something old into something better. I split the will not by love, but by strategy. The cabin. It was always the key, the only one who would look beyond the rot. My eyes burned. I lifted the cassette marked Final Words 2005 and slid it into the old player Doug had lent me to digitize the ledger. The motor whirred, and then, his voice. Grandpa's voice, rougher than I remembered, slower, but steady. You probably hate me right now, kid. That's all right. Better to be mad and awake than safe and asleep. I laughed, just once. I knew Brady would go after the main estate. That's why I kept the land in trust under your name, tied to a clause. What's earned quietly holds better than what's handed loudly. His voice dipped then, thinned. Your father never understood this place. He saw land, I saw legacy, and I saw you. Quiet, thoughtful, not lesser, just different. That was the whole damn point. I paused the tape, stared at the wall. I hadn't cried when the ledger burned, not when Brady shoved me, not even when I found out about the forgery. But I cried now. Not because I had won something, but because, maybe for the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not by the court, not by my brother, by someone long gone, who'd chosen me not for who I pretended to be, but for who I quietly was. When I resumed the tape, his voice cracked. The land belongs with the one who will preserve it, not possess it. If that's still you, then do what I couldn't. Make it mean something again. The tape clicked off into silence. I closed the safe, slower than I'd opened it. Later that night, Doug confirmed the documents were real, admissible, time-stamped, and legally sound. This isn't just backup, he said over the phone. This is clarity. A judge reads this, hears that tape. It's not just evidence, it's purpose. We sat in silence a while longer. Then he said the words I'd been expecting, and somehow still wasn't ready for. Court date is confirmed. Thursday, 9 a.m. public hearing. Bring everything. Before I could answer, a photo fluttered loose from the back of the folder. Brady and I. No more than 10. Sitting barefoot on the cabin steps, knees muddy, arms not quite touching, but close. On the back, Grandpa had written, "One will forget, one will remember." The courtroom smelled of old paper, nervous sweat, and polish too cheap to cover the tension in the air. The wooden benches groaned as people shifted in silence. I carried a cardboard box to the plaintiff's table, filled not with weapons, but with truth. Brady walked in like he'd already won. Polished suit, pressed smile. His attorney trailed behind, nodding like they'd rehearsed victory. Doug patted my shoulder. "Just speak plain," he whispered. "The truth always lands harder that way." The judge entered, older than I'd expected, but her eyes were sharp, alert, like she'd seen this kind of fight before and was already tired of the theatrics. "We'll begin with testimony," she said, "and we'll stay on topic. This is a hearing on land dispute, not family therapy." Still, it felt personal. Kendra was first. She stood straight in her blazer, voice steady. "This cabin wasn't just property," she said. "It was dismissed to Alden so the others wouldn't see what it protected. They knew what they were doing." Then Elias. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My people have buried stories on that land," he said, voice dry as bone. "That soil remembers." The judge leaned forward. Mr. Elias, can you confirm whether the land in question qualifies under the Native Land Preservation Trust? I can, and I have the records. Your clerk already has copies. Then came the three elders, each one with hands worn from work and voices that cracked from memory. One remembered my grandfather delivering firewood through a blizzard. Another remembered him canceling a lease so a family could stay rent-free through a harsh winter. And all of them remembered me, though I hadn't remembered them. When it was my turn, the courtroom dimmed just a little, or maybe it was just my breath catching. The judge asked, "Mr. Trask, you were left a damaged home. Why didn't you sell it?" I didn't hesitate. "Because it's not broken," I said. "It's honest." Then I set the tape recorder on the table, pressed play. Grandpa's voice filled the room, clear, worn, resolute. "The land belongs with the one who will preserve it, not possess it." No one moved, not even Brady. When it ended, there was no applause, just silence, the kind that hangs heavy, not out of confusion, but understanding. Brady finally spoke, but not to argue. "May I make a statement?" he asked the judge. She nodded. He stood, straightened his tie, then sat back down without saying a word. The judge pursed her lips. "We'll recess. I will deliver a ruling tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. But the decision had already passed through the room like wind through pine. Back at the cabin that night, the silence wasn't heavy. It was warm, settling. We sat by the fire, me, Elias, and Kendra. She looked over, the flames reflecting in her eyes. "If you win," she asked softly, "will you stay?" I didn't answer right away. I was still listening. Elias stirred his tea with the back of a spoon. "This land didn't just raise you," he said. "It's waiting for what you'll plant next." I didn't sleep. Just lay there on the couch, eyes open, listening to the soft rhythm of rain tapping the cabin roof. It wasn't a storm, just a steady fall, like a metronome counting time backward, tick by tick, toward something long overdue. I watched the clock strike 7. Then 8. I got dressed in silence, a clean shirt, Grandpa's old watch. The necklace the elder had pressed into my hand now hung gently against my chest. By 9, I was in the same courtroom as yesterday, but everything had changed. Brady sat alone. No lawyer beside him this time, just a creased settlement offer folded tight in his hands, never signed, never submitted. His suit looked the same, but something about it felt smaller now, like the power he'd wrapped himself in no longer fit. Doug nodded to me. We didn't speak. The judge entered with a file in her hand, and no hesitation in her step. "This court has reviewed the trust documents, the testimony, the artifacts submitted as evidence, and the audio recording," she began. "We find that Mr. Alden Trask was not merely left a dilapidated structure. He was entrusted with legacy." She looked directly at me. "Mr. Trask, you were left the estate. Mr. Alden Trask, you were left the responsibility. This court sides with responsibility." A pause. No rustle, no cough, just a still room bearing witness. "The land at Stillwater Lake is hereby registered under Protected Heritage designation, effective immediately, with stewardship granted to Mr. Alden Trask under federal supervision. Mr. Brady Trask's alleged misappropriation of assets will be referred for federal review." She tapped the gavel. Once. And just like that, it was over. I didn't smile, didn't clench my fists in triumph or whisper a thank you to the heavens. I just looked across the aisle at Brady, and for the first time he looked away first. And all of them remembered me, though I hadn't remembered them. When it was my turn, the courtroom dimmed just a little. Or maybe it was just my breath catching. The judge asked, "Mr. Trask, you were left a damaged home. Why didn't you sell it?" I didn't hesitate. "Because it's not broken," I said. "It's honest." Then I set the tape recorder on the table. Pressed play. Grandpa's voice filled the room. Clear. Worn. Resolute. The land belongs with the one who will preserve it, not possess it. No one moved, not even Brady. When it ended, there was no applause. Just silence. The kind that hangs heavy, not out of confusion, but understanding. Brady finally spoke, but not to argue. "May I make a statement?" he asked the judge. She nodded. He stood, straightened his tie, then sat back down without saying a word. The judge pursed her lips. "We'll recess. I will deliver a ruling tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. But the decision had already passed through the room like wind through pine. Back at the cabin that night, the silence wasn't heavy. It was warm, settling. We sat by the fire, me, Elias, and Kendra. She looked over, the flames reflecting in her eyes. "If you win," she asked softly, "will you stay?" I didn't answer right away. I was still listening. Elias stirred his tea with the back of a spoon. "This land didn't just raise you," he said. "It's waiting for what you'll plant next." I didn't sleep. Just lay there on the couch, eyes open, listening to the soft rhythm of rain tapping the cabin roof. It wasn't a storm, just a steady fall, like a metronome counting time backward, tick by tick, toward something long overdue. I watched the clock strike 7, then 8. I got dressed in silence. A clean shirt, Grandpa's old watch, the necklace the elder had pressed into my hand now hung gently against my chest. By 9, I was in the same courtroom as yesterday, but everything had changed. Brady sat alone. No lawyer beside him this time. Just a creased settlement offer folded tight in his hands. Never signed, never submitted. His suit looked the same, but something about it felt smaller now, like the power he'd wrapped himself in no longer fit. Doug nodded to me. We didn't speak. The judge entered with a file in her hand, and no hesitation in her step. "This court has reviewed the trust documents, the testimony, the artifacts submitted as evidence, and the audio recording," she began. "We find that Mr. Alden Trask was not merely left a dilapidated structure. He was entrusted with legacy." She looked directly at me. "Mr. Trask, you were left the estate. Mr. Alden Trask, you were left the responsibility. This court sides with responsibility." A pause. No rustle, no cough, just a still room bearing witness. "The land at Stillwater Lake is hereby registered under Protected Heritage designation, effective immediately, with stewardship granted to Mr. Alden Trask under federal supervision. Mr. Brady Trask's alleged misappropriation of assets will be referred for federal review." She tapped the gavel. Once. And just like that, it was over. I didn't smile, didn't clench my fists in triumph or whisper a thank you to the heavens. I just looked across the aisle. At Brady. And for the first time, he looked away first. When we stepped outside, the sky had cleared. That same gentle drizzle that started the morning had faded, replaced by a golden streak of light breaking through the gray. Back at the cabin that night, the air smelled like pine and distant smoke. The community gathered without invitation, like they knew, like the land had spoken. Noah brought out his wooden flute and played something old, low, winding, like it had roots. Kendra poured wine into mismatched mugs. Elias said nothing at all. He didn't need to. We lit a fire and passed around a bowl of venison stew someone had dropped off without a name. Kids chased each other in the tall grass, their laughter skipping like stones on still water. At one point, a man I hadn't met before sat beside me. "I'm Dean Parker," he said. "I teach at the college 2 towns over. Environmental history." I nodded, unsure where it was going. "We've heard your story," he continued. "The quiet fight, the records, the land. Would you consider speaking to our students about preservation, silence, and truth? For a moment, I hesitated. I'd always been the quiet one, the afterthought. But maybe that was exactly why it mattered now. I'd be honored, I said. Later, after the fire had burned low and the children had fallen asleep in blankets on the porch, I stepped away, stood at the tree line, felt the necklace settle against my collarbone. It shimmered in the moonlight, soft, old, alive, like it remembered everything. The front door creaked open beneath my hand. Not the sharp complaining sound I used to wince at, but something softer, familiar, like a voice clearing its throat before telling a story. I stepped inside. The floor still sloped slightly by the kitchen, and the window above the sink still caught the morning light just right. But the smell had changed. Less mildew, more cedar and old bread. The kind of scent that says someone lives here again. The cabin hadn't been renovated. I wasn't interested in stripping it down and rebuilding it into something new. No, we revived it. Elias brought pine wood from his cousin's mill. Noah showed up with his uncle and sanded the banisters back to their original color. One of the elders, Ruth, rewove the curtains from scrap fabric. Every hand that touched this place added a memory, not a modern feature. Kendra stood in the doorway one afternoon, arms crossed, brow raised. "So, you stayed?" I smiled. "No," I said, tapping the worn door frame. "I returned." The sun broke through the clouds that day, as if it had been waiting for permission. We held the ceremony 2 weeks later. Neighbors, friends, strangers who'd only heard the story but felt called to witness it. The cabin porch sagged under the weight of shared memory. Even Brady came, but stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in his pockets, silent. Doug pulled the cloth off the small plaque nailed just beside the doorframe. The metal glinted gold in the noon sun. To those they tried to forget, may your truth echo longer than their silence. No applause, just quiet, reverent stillness. I stood where Grandpa once stood, right on the front steps, not to claim anything, not to prove anything, just to continue what he hadn't lived long enough to finish. We re-registered the cabin that week. It was now officially recognized as a cultural heritage site under the name Trask Place of Memory. More than a cabin, more than a story. It was a place that held memory the way soil holds roots. That fall, I gave the talk at the college, and then another one at the local high school. And one night, as I was putting up the final light on the new porch beam, a little boy from the reservation wandered up the path. His cheeks were smudged with dirt, his hands sticky from a half-eaten apple. "Are you the man who saved the story?" he asked. I knelt down, met his eyes. "No," I said softly. "The story saved me." He grinned and ran off without another word, his small feet pattering down the same path I used to tread as a boy. The wind picked up gently through the trees, rustling pine needles like whispers. And in that moment, I swear I heard my grandfather's voice again. "Now you understand. You weren't left behind. You were entrusted." Sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't land or money. It's the chance to rewrite the story of how a family remembers itself. Speak your truth gently. Protect what matters quietly, and never underestimate the power of staying, not to fight, but to heal. In the end, your legacy lives not in what you leave behind, but in what you choose to stand for today. If this story brought you comfort or reflection, we'd love for you to join our growing community. Please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and explore more heartfelt tales of family, healing, and quiet strength. There's always another story waiting to be heard. Maybe even yours.